Well, why don't we go ahead and get this underway? Hello, everybody, and welcome to our virtual back to school class, Reflections and Insights, 40 years of teaching at Davidson College. We are thrilled to have you all here. Thank you so much for joining us. Just to go over some Zoom keeping items and quick introductions, my name is Lauren Lozier. And I am the Associate Director in the Office of Alumni and Family Engagement. I am so thrilled to have the opportunity to welcome each of you here with us this evening. And as you may know, these wonderful panelists who join me, featuring Dr. Peter Krentz, Dr. Cynthia Lewis, Dr. Bill Mahoney, Dr. Lou Ortmeyer, and Dr. Clark Ross. Thank you all so much for being here. Before we get started, I wanted to go over a few Zoom keeping items. First of all, participants have been muted, and we ask that you remain muted throughout the event. If you are comfortable and have not changed your Zoom name already to your first and last name, we ask that you do so now. You can rename yourself by clicking on the participants button at the bottom of your screen, hovering your mouse over the name, and then clicking on the More button. Feel free to add your Davidson class year if you have one as well. The chat feature will be available. If you have questions for our panel, please utilize the Q&A. Our panel will not be monitoring the chat, so please do not send them Please do not send questions directly to them. We will do our best to answer as many questions as possible. For optimal viewing, we recommend hovering your mouse at the top of the black Zoom screen, and you will see View pop up. If you click on that and then select speaker view, you will be able to see all the speakers all across the top. In addition, we have enabled a live audio transcription for this call. If you would like to enable this feature on your end, you can hover over the live transcription button on your screen and subtitles should appear. Please note that the captions are not always accurate, so we ask for your grace and understanding. If you do have a tech issue, please go ahead to send a chat to myself, Lauren Lozier, or one of my colleagues, Carissa or Anissa. And now for our speakers, I am thrilled to welcome Dr. Peter Krentz, Chair and W.R. Gray Professor of Classics and Professor of History, Dr. Cynthia Lewis, the Charles A. Dana Professor of English Emeriti, Dr. Bill Mahoney, a Charles A. Dana Professor Emeritus of Religious Studies, Dr. Lou Ortmeyer, Professor Emeritus of Political Science, and Dr. Clark Ross, the Francis W. Johnston Professor of Economics. And now we will get started. I have a list of questions that I will kind of launch into and ask our panel to answer them, and then we will just kind of have a very general discussion. So I look forward to it. First of all, the biggest question I think a lot of people would love to know is, how have the Davidson students changed since from when you first all became faculty members till now? And because you're on my screen first, Dr. Mahoney, I'll start with you.
Oh, okay. Hi, everybody. Wow, it's wonderful to see you. Wonderful. I'm not going to avoid or evade the question, but the students over the years have been remarkable and amazing, like you. They have continued, in my experience. Of course, nobody's quite as good as the class of 1984, but compared that said, continued to be energetic and vibrant and enthusiastic, inquiring, clear thinking. They are still a delight to teach. So I don't see much change in that regard. I think probably perhaps we could check this, but there might be a little bit more diversity. I know that's a problematic word, but there may be more diversity in the student population than in 1984. Different kinds of diversity and a kind of a breadth, perhaps a little bit broader population. But that said, I find that they still are the the wonderful people that I've enjoyed teaching for 40 years, and I'm honored to have been able to teach them.
I will just probably go right off the top. And if you don't want to answer, you can just say pass. Dr. Clark Ross, you're next.
I knew this question was coming, and I was trying to figure out how best to answer it.
Now you're in the hot seat.
In economics, which is, of course, where I done all my teaching and am most familiar, there is a change in the sense that students, I think, don't do as well in some areas, but may do better in other areas. They're a little bit less disciplined, I think, in terms of wanting to show up for class, take good notes, read the material, and study well, so that in introductory courses, the performance sometimes has not been as great, because I honestly don't think they like to study alone as much. They're more accustomed to acting with people, and economics is a little harder to do that way. Now, on the positive side, when you get into some of the more advanced courses and their research projects, they come highly engaged, very engaged, and like to see the relevance of economics. And perhaps more than in prior years, we have them doing individual research projects, social policy type projects, and they do very well. So it's a little bit of a mix in the change. I would agree with Bill. The overall interaction is, of course, still very, very positive. But they're coming from a different high school environment too, and we have to take them as they come from their high schools, which is also different than it was in 1984.
Dr. Krentz?
I'm sure to get myself in trouble. I'll start by saying we had a wonderful day today. It was the Werner Miller Case Symposium, which we've had for 7 or 8 years. And I think we had something like 343 student posters. We had 8 different musical performances. We had students showing their art. We had just all sorts of stuff going around all day on campus. And it's very impressive, some of the things that students are doing. On the more negative side, I think we've seen quite a change in students since COVID, which probably does not come as a surprise to any of you. But students, I would say, many of them are emotionally much more fragile. Students will say, I need a personal day. I'm not coming to class today. Students don't want to memorize things, which is a problem, especially for introductory languages like Greek and Latin and classics. And that's, of course, because they can look everything up. But that does, that there are certain things that you need to learn that you have to, off the top of your head if you want to read. What else would I say about them? They expect very high grades, but I don't think that they're always willing to put in the work for it. My recollection of the class of 84, which is that was my second year here. Katie, I remember you in my humanities class. Sarah, I think I had you in a class too. I forget if it was humanities or not. Anyway, I just remember that class, those students as more hardworking and better at dealing with setbacks. So I think students today, they expect really high grades. If they don't do well on something, emotionally, they're more fragile. Before COVID, the big word on campus was, what was our big word, Clark? It was something about bouncing back. We were trying to get students resilience. That was it, resilience. We all talked about resilience, and COVID completely wiped that out. And COVID was extraordinarily difficult years. And so we were all encouraged to bend over backwards to be nice to students and extend grace on everything they asked for. And that's kind of carried over. So from my perspective, and you're talking to somebody who's been here for a long time now and sounds like a grouchy old person, but I think we're having a hard time getting back to rigorous standards at the college. The student body
Dr.
is definitely very much more diverse than it used to be. I think no matter how you define diverse, I think we're more diverse than your class was, and that can be very exciting.
Dr. Lewis
Ortmeyer.
or Ortmeyer, either.
Yeah. I agree with the comments so far about changes or similarities. But one thing I would mention is my former department, political science, the tremendous change that occurred from class of '84 onward was when I came to Davidson, our majors were about 80% male. Nowadays, it's 50-50, which also reflects the composition of the faculty in the department. That was a welcome change because I found I increasingly got away from a lecture format to guided discussions. And women were far more willing to try that and try new things than the males. So it was a good change. And toward the end, I would say about 75 to 80% of our majors who were doing honors were women. And so those demographic structural changes were very positive.
Dr. Lewis?
I want to begin just by saying how wonderful it is to look at this gallery and see so many familiar, but in some ways long lost faces. Katie, I've been in touch with more recently, Kara and Sarah and Grant and Alicia. Pat, I see you more often around town, but it's just really rewarding to see you all here and to feel the same warmth and connection with you that I, like Bill, feel for the contemporary students or felt until last year when I finally left the classroom. One thing I'd add to what's been said, and really Lou was getting at this, is that when I came to Davidson in 1980, women were not naturalized here. Over my years, they became naturalized. This became as much their institution as the men's students' institution. And I used the presence of bathroom stalls for women versus urinals in the women's restrooms as a measure of that progress, if you can call it that. The other thing that I really want to emphasize is the diversity in so many ways. I went on sabbatical for the year 2007 and 2008. And when I came back and taught my first year composition class in a year, my students in that class were completely different than they'd ever been. I had much more ethnic and cultural diversity. I had much more economic diversity. The Davidson Trust, as expensive as it is really worth every penny because the students who are coming here by virtue of that endowment are every bit as talented and every bit as deserving, and now they can afford to be here. So I see those changes as remarkably beneficial and positive for Davidson.
Thank you all so much. Cynthia, I'm going to start with you and I'm going to go back down the other way. Question, just so I don't forget, is truly what it means, why I'm doing that. Would you be able to kind of let us all know how has the campus culture changed? So in addition to how the students have changed, how the culture at Davidson has changed over the years.
Well, I think what's gone hand in hand with the greater diversity at Davidson is a kind of bonding. You know, we've always seen Davidson students bond and alums bond, and it's just so obvious to those of us who watch you all come back for reunions and who communicate back with us that there's such a solidarity among Davidson alums. But I've just been so struck by how alliances and bonding have crossed over what might have been boundaries 30, 40 years ago, and the openness of our students to more difference and more diversity. I think our students are far more politically liberal now, and I'm happy to say that, than they were when I first got here. It felt like I had landed on a different planet. But and I think that too has gone with the greater diversity. So I mean, by and large, it's a very similar culture to, I think, what it was, back in '84 or before. But it's just more capacious, I think, and more more open and willing to embrace more difference.
Dr. Ortmeyer?
I'll agree with your comments, but I've been away from it now for 9 years, so I may be out of practice. But one thing I noticed was that the changing demographics that I mentioned, particularly in my department and the people I was teaching, produced people who were far more willing to take a chance, an opportunity to do something new, which struck a chord with me because right at that time I was changing my own pedagogical interests. I was getting almost completely away from lectures into case teaching and guided discussion and sort of open guidance of students, and wanted students to jump in and take a chance and offer their ideas and opinions and critique, including of each other, which I had not found to be the case earlier. And so from a pedagogical perspective, it was much more fun. This also played out in terms of other things I was going to mention eventually. Right as your class of '84 was here, my department of political science started a new program, Davidson and Washington.
Oh, yeah.
Which we were a little hesitant that it would be fully subscribed on a continuing basis. Instead, it's been full every year. In fact, the last year, I'm retired now, but this past year, they had to take 2 groups with 2 faculty advisors because they had so many applicants. And this has shown me that people are much more interested in venturing out and trying new things. And also, of course, trying to increase credentials through internships and other engagement and so forth. I've benefited because I also began not only case teaching with case studies, but in writing cases. And I found among the students much more willingness among the women to serve as research assistants and get involved in that process and sort of debate with me about how the words we use were going to do what I was trying to do and what they thought I probably should be doing rather than what I thought. And that was also a very eye-opening and fun exercise.
I think it was Dr. Krentz next, but here, see, I already fell apart. So Dr. Krentz, you get to be next.
Okay. Here are 2 things I think you would notice different from 1984. One is students are incredibly busy. And I think this comes straight in from high school. They all seem to think that they need to have a gazillion activities in order to move on to the next phase of life. As I recall, when I was in college in the 70s, and I think still when you all were in college, there wasn't all that much going on around Davidson, and people studied and partied, and that was about it. We now have a lot more community outreach, a lot more opportunities for students to get involved off campus, and ever more clubs and so forth. So they're very busy. I would say over busy, as are faculty. That's probably my biggest worry about the college in the future, is that we're just busying ourselves to death and everybody is stressed because of time. The other thing I think you'd notice is difference is athletics. So after the Steph Curry era, and as we moved into the A10 conference, we have really amped up athletics. And moving into the A10 has in fact meant that student athletes are away from campus more and spend more time traveling. And since we have about 25% of the students are on a D1 team, that's very visible on campus.
Dr. Ross?
Yeah, I would follow up with what Peter Krentz just said and agree with him on the busyness, because when I think of the class of 84, economics at that time was more male than female. Fortunately, now we're a little bit more equal with our gender balance as students. But, you know, the male students would talk about their fraternities. They would talk about their what they were hoping to do is with a job, generally with banking or something in economics. But they were fairly confined in their discussions. Now you see students so much more involved in a whole range of other things, whether it be in the arts, music, attending Dean Rusk program events, that they are very busy. In some sense, it does take away from their study time, but I do think it leads to their having a more diverse set of friends as well. They're not just confined perhaps to those from their eating house or their first year dorm crowd. So that, you know, I tend to see the same person at different times with, you know, with different people, a very diverse set of differences. So while I think there is a problem with them being overwhelmed with this, and to be honest, for many kids or for many students, some of these activities come before studying, because, you know, I will ask somebody, well, can you come to the office? Or they'll want to come to the office for help. And I give a time, oh no, I have to do such and such then. And it's not academic, it's something else. But it's clear that that kind of comes first.
Mm.
So, but still, I think there's a real positive gain with the diversity of activity.
Dr. Mahoney?
I would give a harmonic response to all that's been said. Again, I think it's a vibrant culture, campus culture, remarkable amount of stuff going on, just seemingly all the time. And I do agree that students continue to watch out for each other and to kind of reach out to each other and take care of each other. That's consistent all the way through. I may be wrong here, and I can be corrected, but I sense that there's a little bit less emphasis now on Patterson Court activities. I'm not sure about that, but that's my intuition. That time outside of, and all of the diversity of commitments, time commitments, the circle's expanding kind of beyond Patterson Court and getting more into the Davidson community. We have what's known as the Hurt Hub. I don't know if you've heard about this, which is it's a place where students and community businesses get together and work with each other and help each other out. There's a lot of engagement with community internships, and we have the careers office to thank for that. So I think, again, I may be wrong, but I think there's less emphasis on Patterson Court activities and more emphasis on other things. I am a little bit saddened that my intuition, again, my sense is that there are fewer students leaving campus to study abroad, that they're staying here. And a good part of that makes perfect sense, because for a few years, nobody could go anywhere. But preceding that, I think starting in the 2000s and the 2010s and teens, fewer people going on study abroad programs. And I think that's too bad in my mind. There, kind of conversely, whereas in 1984, we had a few programs in which students from other cultures and countries would come to Davidson for a year. There's not much of that. There's not much of the kind of almost like an exchange program going on, which I think is, I'd like to see that return. The Dean Russ program continues to be active, and yet it's more kind of programming rather than bringing students into other cultures. And what else would I say? I do agree with others that the culture itself, the campus culture, does tend to be a little bit more grade conscious than it was when you were here. And there may be other vectors and forces working on that. I see it as a little bit unfortunate. But underneath it, again, I don't want to sound like Pollyanna, but underneath it, within the kind of grade consciousness, I do sort of see, reading between the lines, that the students really are interested in learning what we're presenting. Now that may be different in humanities courses. I mean, not the program, the humanities program, but in religion, religious studies, and philosophy and language and that sort of thing. It may be different because people want to kind of think about larger issues and not worry so much about the grades. Now, I don't want to compare myself to economics or political science in that way, but I do still see an enthusiasm among the students beyond the concern for grades. I think that's, I have several more points here, but I think they're kind of repetitions of what others have said.
I just had somebody pop into the chat that was a really you all probably know her, Eileen Keeley, class at 89, but she did want to point out that that 10% of our student body are international students. So although they're not like the true exchange students as during the class of 1984, their time here, they are now here for 4 years and
Full-time students.
Full-time students. Yep.
And that's a big change. So Eileen, thank you for that. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. 10%. Yeah. And that goes along with what we've been saying, the diversity in various ways is broadening and increasing.
The next question I'm going to kind of combine a little bit because I do think it actually works hand in hand. So how have you had to adjust your teaching strategies and or styles over the years? And has that been because of technology, or has that been because of the students just evolving, or does that, is that a combination of the two? And I will let anybody who wants to start so I don't have to pick on you this time.
Well, I'll try. Economics has been taught in the introductory level in a very traditional way for many years, kind of the old-fashioned chalk and talk type thing. And we're trying to do a little bit less of that because students really are not that interested in listening to lectures as much as those in 1984 might have been. They're a bit more interested in being engaged. And so it becomes a bit more of a challenge in some courses to engage them, but still have the same degree of learning. Because like in economics, if they haven't started with any knowledge, it's hard for them to be fully engaged. But we work on that. Increasingly, we see students, again, in the social sciences, more working from articles as opposed to textbooks. We see them more doing research projects. Lou Ortmeyer talked about his case study method that has spread. So I think there are more opportunities at the more advanced levels for students to do individual work. And we also start them off, I think, at least in theory, pretty well with the writing course, the first year writing course that every student must take and do a research project. Now, we've debated how successful this has been across the board, but in principle, when I did mine on the Great Depression, I really did have an opportunity to try to introduce students to trying to do a little bit of scholarly work and how a scholar would work. So I think there's a greater diversity in teaching methods, much less of the chalk and talk. And that's both because disciplines have changed, as well as student interests and what they want, what they want has changed.
One
That's
big
been true for
change
me too. You go ahead, Cynthia.
One big change I've noticed is that I can no longer, or I could when I retired, I could no longer give an assignment orally. And I could do very little just orally without writing down either what I was asking them to do by way of an assignment or what I was asking them to learn. If I were lecturing or just giving an introduction to something, I would write almost everything out. And even then, even if I spelled out every little nuance of a written assignment, I would still have students come back and say that they didn't understand or they wanted more clarification. And I took that to be a concern with grades and wanting to do what I wanted versus what they wanted to do with the assignment. But that's slightly separate from what I think is a less of an ability to hear, less of an ability to listen and absorb what we're saying orally, and the need to have that sort of reinforced by something in writing.
Dr. Lewis, do you think that's because, so often, the students now, everything is done on their phone. So all the communication is like over a text message versus like a verbal conversation?
I definitely think it has to do with phones.
It's interesting. Dr. Krentz, you were going to say something.
Well, my experience has been a lot like Lou's, partly because I team taught with him a number of times. So I also have moved away from straight lecturing. Back when I taught in the humanities program, I always liked the humanities discussions much more than the lectures. So typical classes now involve much more, short, maybe 10-minute mini lectures and then other in-class activities, often in groups. One of the interesting things about COVID for me was I team taught a history course asynchronously online, so that I actually had a student in China and a student in California who were able to take this course because we never met as a whole group. So we had to come up with all kinds of ways for the students to work together in small groups that we mixed up. It was, and I did pick up some interesting techniques from that have carried over. So I do continue to use some short videos, for example, in my introductory history class.
Dr. Mahoney or Dr. Ortmeyer, do you have anything to add?
In the latter, well, particularly since COVID, but in the years preceding that time also, I noticed much more use of technology, and I myself used it, although not as much as I think many of my colleagues. Which it's for me, it's a kind of new way of thinking, and it's a new pedagogy, because I don't tend to think in those ways, and with computers, as it were. But I was happy to do the adjustment. I mean, when I first came to Davidson in 1982, none of us had laptops. I didn't know what WordPerfect was. You remember WordPerfect? So there through the years there has been that adjustment in pedagogy, and we now can count on people doing internet research rather than going to the library, and finding hard copies to read. So that shifts the pedagogy as well. So more use of projections and screens and that sort of thing in the classroom than previously.
One other thing I would mention is we've been encouraged as the cost of higher education has gotten so high, we've been encouraged to try to avoid making students buy very expensive textbooks.
Mhm.
There's a lot of emphasis now, I think, on
Hmm.
finding readings that can be made available to students as PDFs.
Mhm.
The downside of it is I'm getting a little more skeptical about this than I have been. I think there's a very different reading experience when holding a book in your hands and
Mhm.
reading a PDF, even if it's the same text. So I do think there's a downside to that, but that kind of thing has become very common. Give us another one, Lauren.
All right, I'll keep going. Let's see. This is interesting. What disciplines are in favor and what disciplines are out of favor with students? And it's a two-part question. And what do you think the underlying forces are in driving that? Go ahead.
I'll start because I looked up the profiles of the last 5 classes just out of curiosity. So in the last 3 years, the top 3 majors have been, and each one of these has been the top one of those 3 years.
Okay.
Biology, economics, and political science.
Hmm.
Next after that would come psychology. And after that, what else would come in there? Environmental studies.
Oh.
In general, physics is up, although still not huge. Chemistry is very solid. Computer science. I forgot computer science. Computer science is growing rapidly and I think is on the verge of passing psychology, and I wouldn't be surprised if it comes into the top 3. That's interesting. What's out of fashion would be everything in the humanities. So some of you will be shocked to hear, we have more students now than when you were here. Recently, the number of history majors and English majors, which I think were 2 of the top 3 in 1984, they've been averaging in the 20s. And this year, where there were only 18 history majors.
Wow.
The language departments have been particularly hard hit.
I think some of the interdisciplinary majors have more attracted from the humanities than from other areas, don't you, Peter? Like when you talk about
I
gender.
do. Yeah. Are you all familiar with the full number of majors that we have now?
Mhm.
Give me a few head shakes. Would you like to hear the list of would
Please,
you like to hear
please,
what
Peter,
majors
yes.
we now have that didn't exist when you were here? Katie, I'm looking at you. Is that so? There are a lot.
Right.
Africana studies, Chinese language and literature, communication studies, computer science, East Asian studies, environmental studies, gender and sexuality studies, Latin American studies. So all of those are new majors, and I would agree they probably do tend to pull more from the humanities.
Hmm.
I'll let somebody else have a shot at
At the why.
why these student trends are taking place.
Well, with economics, I mean, we just have so many kids who are interested in finance and business and banking. And the closest thing that we have as a major to that is economics. I
Hmm.
was up at Muhlenberg College a month ago doing a review, and they have a department that's much broader. It's accounting, business, economics, and finance. The lowest number of majors was in economics because everybody wanted to be in accounting, finance, or business. We don't have that here for them. So they have to take economics as a proxy. And it's clear that job market opportunities are driving that somewhat.
I might venture to say that that there are some larger cultural forces and maybe even political as well. I think there are voices that people are listening to that say that um, liberal studies, liberal arts is not productive it doesn't go anywhere. And that, you know, a kind of a parallel stress on the STEM disciplines, which is wonderful. I think it's great to have science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, but we don't have engineering here. But I think that maybe students and their families are listening to voices from beyond Davidson that are saying, move toward those disciplines a little bit more than towards the humanities. Which, you know, I celebrate with my colleagues and with students who are gaining so much from them, but it also saddens me because I think one thing that I know one thing that Davidson is so good at is working not only with, you know, the mind, but also the heart, and the humanities can help do that.
Dr. Ortmeyer or Dr. Lewis, would you guys like anything to add?
Dr. Ortmeyer needs to, because the odd one here, so biology makes sense because of we still have very strong pre-medical program. But the odd one of those top three is political science. Why in the world people think political science is going to lead to more productive careers than other majors is a great mystery.
But they get jobs.
I'd like to hear your take on that.
They get jobs.
They get jobs.
Our majors get jobs rather routinely.
Well, they all get
Partly
jobs.
do that.
Classics majors get jobs.
Well, yeah, I'm talking about in large measure, many of the majors, and they're not doing it in the traditional ways. When I came to Davidson, the vast majority of our majors went to law school.
Yeah, I was going to say
That's no longer the case. In fact, it's less than 20% anymore out of the majors. But they go into other things, and particularly business. You don't have to be in economics to go into business and commercial life. And the students have discovered that. And they particularly explore it in Davidson, Washington, and other internship possibilities. And so that's been partly driving it. And an interest in sort of problem solving has become a sort of hallmark of my former department. And that seems to be in vogue in much of the job market.
I am going to piggyback on this conversation about the disciplines to see how that translates into career choices, which is kind of a similar to what we were chatting about. But Bill Satterwhite, class of 1984, hi, Bill and Katie. They want to know what about top career choices? It used to be doctor, lawyer, banking, and ministry were all near the top. Are they still? And it seems to him, to Bill, that consulting and investment banking are now at the top of the list. Do you agree?
I'm not sure statistically. I would say right now, one of the more attractive routes for students is the consulting route.
Yeah.
That has really extended. And some of the research we have kids doing, I think, encourages that. And they really like the notion of working on projects.
Mm-hmm.
So that is somewhat surpassed, I think, some of the investment banking intrigue among some of our students. But the eco majors are still pretty predictable in terms of finance and banking. But I also hear a few more of them going into industry and some more diversity. But I interact with a large number of students, but they are somewhat of a specific set. Cynthia and Peter and Bill interact with a more, variety of students, and they would give you a better indication of the variety of majors, maybe. I mean, the variety of.
I'd sort of like to go back to the question about why the humanities have faltered.
Mm-hmm.
I think that humanities also involve a lot of problem solving, but the problem solving is more abstract and more theoretical. and less about the day-to-day world. And I think that that makes the humanities seem impractical and not directly applicable to anything anybody's going to be doing out in the world, rather than as training, sort of universal training for anything that anyone went after in the world. And I think another part of the humanities we haven't talked about is the emphasis on writing and the rigors of writing. And I don't think writing right now in our culture is as valued as it was when most of the people who are in attendance here, when they were in school. I think writing just was given much more deference and much more, was seen as much more important and useful. But now when you can take your two thumbs and hack out anything without punctuation or capital letters or even coherence, writing doesn't seem that important, maybe.
We've had some interesting some questions that have popped up into the chat from our participants. So I'm going to kind of go that route, since we've been chatting almost 50 minutes now. So in the interest of time, I'm going to kind of switch gears and go that way. So this question from John Jewett, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing anybody's name. In my time, 1968 to 1972, we had a sprinkling of extremely smart students. I knew 3 Rhodes Scholars and a Marshall Scholar. 2 of my friends had perfect LSAT scores. Does Davidson still get these students?
Yeah, I think so. Don't we?
Yeah.
Well, we haven't had a Rhodes Scholar in a long time. So if that's the benchmark, that's a high benchmark.
We have done pretty well with Fulbrights. And of
Mhm.
course, we continue to have our, the individual study project. What's it called, Lou? Where the
Watson?
the Watson project. We tend to 1 or 2 people with that. So, I mean, I do think, and I think we are getting people that also get very strong graduate awards for graduate study. The one thing that has been lagging, and I think it's a function of a whole range of things that we have a little more trouble controlling, is the roads. But I think smaller schools have had more of a challenge with the roads, and I hate to see that be the one benchmark that stays with you, because I do think we have students showing great excellence in other areas.
We have a question, thank you all, from Margaret Shippen, class of 1992. I teach at a Miami-Dade college, a large urban minority serving institution in South Florida. In the fall, I will start teaching our honors college students who are sophomores making their plans to transfer to schools like Davidson College. I'm wondering what advice I can give my students about how to navigate living and studying in such a different environment. Great question, Margaret. Thank you for asking that.
Let me make sure I understand that the different environment being Miami-Dade and Davidson.
Margaret, feel free to say something.
Or is it community college and liberal arts college? What is the difference there?
The size of the institution, the size of the community that wraps around the institution. Yeah, just pretty much everything.
Yeah.
I don't know that we have easy answers for you on that.
I
stumped you.
You have.
Yeah, no, I don't feel stumped by it. I think probably drawing some of the things that we're talking about tonight. I mean, think about the importance of being in community. Now, I know in Miami-Dade, student is in community as well, but responsibilities to the community, taking care of each other, watching out for each other. And that will happen in Miami-Dade as well. But and then I think picking up on some of the things that, like for example, Cynthia just said, concentrate on writing a bit, concentrate on, as others of my colleagues have said, concentrate on reading and engaged reading. Think about applying knowledge that you're gaining in your studies at Miami-Dade and elsewhere. Think about applying that and applying it in a way that draws wisdom. And I think, you know, the interplay there, or the dance, or the movement between knowledge and wisdom, I think, is something that Davidson is oriented toward, and that your student might help to kind of talk about, you know, what are some of the similarities and differences between knowledge and wisdom, and bring that then with you as you enter into the community here at Davidson. And I hope that your student would feel welcomed here. I'm confident that they would.
I think I find it challenging to answer because I've only taught at Davidson, so I don't really have an idea of what Miami-Dade would be like.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe what I'm about to say is completely off base, but one of the great things about Davidson is that we're a small community with a faculty very committed to teaching and to students. And I think some students come in from high schools where that is not the relationship they've had with teachers they regard as authority figures. So I would encourage you to get that student to get to know faculty members. One of my favorite bits of advice for students is that they should all go visit their faculty members in their office within the first 2 weeks and look around the office and find something that they can see where they can identify a shared interest that has nothing to do with the class. So that would be my bit of advice, would be to try to develop. I think we're doing much better on this. We have much more resources at the college now than we used to support such students. We have actually a group of students from Miami every year, and a special advisor, and work together. So I think we have improved.
Yeah, the posse students.
The posse students.
I had an advisee many years ago, before posses and lots of the administrative positions that are now in place to help students like this. He transferred into Davidson from, I think, CPCC, and he wound up in Phi Beta Kappa and did really brilliantly. And I think the reason he did so well, in addition to just having extraordinary discipline and awareness of his environment and of what it was going to take to succeed, was exactly what Peter said, that he attached himself to a couple of faculty members who really enjoyed guiding him. And that kind of relationship was of mutual benefit. I was so proud of him when he did honors work and was inducted into Phi Beta Kappa. And I think anybody who knew him and worked with him felt the same way.
We have time for one or two more questions. And this question, funny enough, was actually presented by one of the panelists, if we wanted to, you know, stir the pot a little bit, but actually 2 people have asked the same thing. So this is actually from Mary Tabmack, class of 1984. Is the honor code still as important in the campus community?
This is an extraordinarily challenging question, partly because information about the honor code and the honor council has always been pretty secretive. So back when you all were students, you know, maybe we would hear a report once a year. The faculty would hear a report that there were so many cases before the honor council, but you didn't hear any details about any of the cases. And I would say now we hear even less. Anecdotally, I would say a very high percentage of the faculty feel that the honor system is broken. And the students have lost a lot of our trust. This particularly came out last spring. And exactly where we're headed with this, I don't know. I think some people feel that the honor code is kind of a Southern white male thing, and that it works less well when we have students from neighborhoods or even countries where turning someone into the authorities might be seen as just anathema, something you would never do. So students I think, have more trouble now turning other students in, which was always really the hardest part of the honor code. I think we are having a hard time getting students to serve on the honor council, which in your day I thought it was considered a prestigious position. So yeah, I think we're having some issues with that, and we've had a lot of faculty conversation about it.
Peter and I talked about this morning, but we knew that this question would come up, and we've had similar things to say. I am a little bit more confident or hopeful. I have a economic history class with 35 students, and I give them take-home tests where they basically are not supposed to use their notes, and they're supposed to answer the questions and turn it in. And I've by and large felt comfortable that they have adhered to my requests. Candidly, I've had some that were pretty poor, that it was pretty clear that they hadn't, taken advantage of every resource. But I talked to them about it. I sort of used some of the old language that Charlie Ratliff, whom you all know from 1984, used to talk about being such a sacred part of Davidson, and that to uphold it, it takes everybody to do his or her part. And so I feel fairly more comfortable, but I also have others in economics who are saying that they really do feel a lot of cheating, quite frankly, does happen on some of their take-home tests, particularly ones that are more problem and quantitative oriented.
To some extent, I think COVID has played a role here too. So, when COVID first broke out, we sent all the students home, and all the exams were done at home. And that kind of continued a lot the next year. There had already been a drop in the number of faculty members using the self-scheduled exam system. And in fact, it had gotten so low that the registrar reports that sometimes students were taking an exam in a room by themselves. So that's kind of on us, I think, for not using the system more. And then many people have continued to use take-home tests, which again, put an opportunity right there, which maybe we should try to not put that opportunity there, and we might have better results. The year after, that first spring when everybody went home, that whole next year, we taught basically online. And I think there was a real loss of the social cohesion. The entering students learn a Davidson way of life from the older students, and that class really missed out on that first year. So it's a little hard to sort this all out, and it's very hard to come up with any kind of numbers.
Right.
But I do think the honor code is a serious concern on campus right now. It's been one of my favorite things about teaching at the college all these years, and it makes me sad that we have the discussions now. I have a colleague who believes that she needs to proctor her tests now, which, I never did that. I always walked in and handed out the test and waited 2 minutes to see if you had any questions, and then came back at the end of the period to pick up the results, which I think was the way everybody did it in the early 80s. So some of that, I think, is on the faculty, is what I'm saying.
Well, we are at time. I do feel like we could probably carry on this discussion about all things Davidson, and I do appreciate all the panelists taking their time out of their very busy and full schedules for for being with us this evening. I will say for those individuals who have put questions into the chat that we did not get to, I will follow up with our panelists and ask them for their insights, and then I will reach back out to you personally with these questions or with these answers. But specifically, I would really love to thank the class of 1984 for sponsoring this event. And it's been a pleasure to work with your entire committee. So thank you so much. Please do note that this event has been recorded and will be available on our website in about 2 weeks. Finally, thank you all so much for joining us this evening, and I hope everyone has a wonderful evening. Thank you. Go Cats.